Welcome to the StoryADay podcast. This is Julie Duffy from StoryADay.org, encouraging you to be a writer every day, not someday.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julie from StoryADay here. I hope that you have had a wonderful writing week, or that you've had a wonderful living week where you've been out just gathering material that's going to turn into stories someday. Sometimes that's uncomfortable, sometimes it's difficult, and I'm sending you hugs if that's the case. Sometimes it's wonderful because you're somewhere new, or you've been on vacation, or it's a sunny day and you're just having a great time. Just remember to keep soaking up all those details. We don't need to be at our desks all the time. Sometimes writing looks a lot like staring out the window, lying on a beach, talking to friends, having experiences. I've been doing a lot of work this week on actually all three different stages of the writing process. Well, there's more than stages, but the actual writing part. I've been working on putting together a workshop for the StoryADay Superstars about pitching, which is sort of the end of the process when it's like the second last step before you start trying to get readers to hear about your book. Then the step before that is, if you want someone to help you publish your book, then you need to pitch it to publishers and agents and editors. Mainly we deal with the agents and they deal with the publishers. So we're putting together a workshop on how to put together that pitch, because I know there's nothing more that writers love than summarizing the 100,000 words with all of their nuance that you've put together and summarizing it into a 30-second summary or pitch or a 5-minute pitch. And so we put that kind of stuff off. So for people who are approaching that stage, I'm working on that with them this week. But not everyone is at that stage, and you're never going to get to that stage unless you're doing the actual writing. So that's what I tend to talk about most here at StoryADay, getting you to the page, getting you to the end. And so I've been working also on something that I'm going to be bringing you very soon about that, an opportunity for you to commit to your writing, not just during a challenge, because of course StoryADay September is coming, and the StoryADay May 5 fun size challenge was so popular that I'm going to be bringing that back in September in a sort of even more concentrated and powerful form to get you writing, to get you the confidence to write and finish a story. But beyond that, I've got another little thing up my sleeve for you, which will take that process and keep it going over the long term. Because it's all very well to turn up once in a while for our writing, but the progress really happens. The improvement, the skill, the ease really comes in when we're writing consistently. And I know we creative people don't always like the word consistent, but it doesn't mean you have to get up at 6 o'clock every morning and write. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a reminder, a trigger to show up for your writing every week, an encouragement to actually finish stories every week, and maybe a little bit of a sense that you're doing this with other people. You're not alone, you're not crazy. So watch your inbox for that. And then in the middle part of the process, I've actually been doing a lot of writing myself, not just stuff for StoryADay, but actual fiction. How about that? So that's been fantastic. And I wanted to circle back round to that because of how I started today, talking about how writing isn't always what it looks like. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that I had been on vacation, and yes, I know that's a huge privilege, but especially now, after years of really not going much further than my little town's limits. And for the first 3 months of the whole pandemic, I literally did not go outside my town. I don't think I went outside my house much, except a couple of trips to the grocery store. And it felt really weird when I got on a fast road again after 3 months of not driving anywhere. But it's all for a writer, for all the ups and downs, for all the terrible, terrible things that came over the past couple of years. For a writer, we tend to look at these things as experiences, as things that could be translated from our personal experience into the experience a character has, into the experience that conveys a truth that a reader might need to hear. We process it ourselves by writing about it, and people handle life in large part by telling stories, sharing stories, consuming stories that make them feel less alone. So yeah, I've got a whole bunch of stuff from the pandemic that we can all talk about for years. And one of those things for me was getting to break out at the end of it and actually go on vacation. Especially for someone like me who grew up in another country and whose whole family lives in another country. And although I do speak roughly the same language as the people in the country I live in now, there's just, you know, when you go home and there's just the ways that people talk that are idioms. In Scotland, we certainly have our own version of the language. We call it Scots. You would understand most of it. It's mostly like English, but there's a lot of words, a lot of syntax that is different. The way that people live, when you go back to a place where you used to live and it's substantially different from where you currently live, it's such a kick in the pants, because we forget that things are not the way they are in our everyday lives. And just things like going to a cafe and sitting around having breakfast and just listening and seeing how people interact, you know, people popping in and seeing each other for, you know, an hour over a cup of tea and just nattering away in the local accent and talking about local things and places, and it's just so refreshing. It was such a wonderful experience for me to get away and do that. And then while I was there, I was in Glasgow in Scotland. Glasgow is a big city, but it's also quite compact, so you can get around a lot. But it's an old city, and it's always been very culturally rich. It's got one of the oldest universities in Britain. I think it has the oldest university in Scotland. So it's been a very cultural place for a long time. There's been a lot of immigration, emigration. We are rediscovering our history of the slave trade, because there are a lot of the merchants in rich merchants in Glasgow in the 18th century. It turns out, they didn't teach us this in school, turns out they were involved in the tobacco trade, they were involved in the slave trade. So a lot of the big buildings in Glasgow are you know, we're looking at them slightly differently now. So the whole feel of the city has changed, but it's a very intellectually deep city. There's music and art and pattern. Everybody's a storyteller in Glasgow. There's a lot of toing and froing out in a history between Glasgow and Ireland, and you know the Irish like to tell stories. So it was just wonderful to be there. And one of the things I did while I was away was I picked up a lot of books by local writers. And if you get a chance to travel, I really recommend that you pick up books by local writers, because they will sink you into a way of thinking and a way of reading that is different from what you're seeing on the New York Times bestseller list or whichever bestseller list you're following. There's a book I read a couple of years ago called Rosewood by Tate Thompson, and just reading that, I could tell he wasn't American. I could tell just from the references they used, this was somebody who had spent significant time in Britain at the very least. And when you read, and so this time I was reading crime books by Glasgow authors. Noir is very big in Scotland, and crime books. So I was reading some books by authors from there, and there's just an outlook, there's a way of looking at the world that's just that little bit different when you are reading from another place. So there's another thing. So anyway, the point of all that, it wasn't just to tell you about my holiday. The point of all that was to say that I came back so refreshed. I stepped away from feeling like I needed to be producing content, fiction, stories, novels, blog posts, newsletters, stepped away from that completely and gave myself that 2 weeks to just live and experience life somewhere else. So you could do that. If you are planning travel, don't, unless you absolutely have to, don't try and construct something written while you're living there. Sure, journal, absolutely. And I journaled about how I felt, and I journaled about things that I was seeing, and I journaled about the books I was reading and the places I'd been, and I took loads of pictures, and I took loads of videos and sound recordings as well. But if you are able to step away from production, it can be a wonderful thing. And so when I got back, I was full of all these new experiences, full of all these new words and books and ideas, and I couldn't help but write. It all came tumbling out of me, and I had a project that was sitting stalled before I left, came back and opened it up and was like, I can do this. I can do this now. I remember what it is to be excited about reading, and therefore what it is to be excited about writing. If you are not traveling, you can do this anyway. You can create a writing vacation for yourself where you tell yourself, I am not going to write anything on any of my projects this week or this 2 weeks. I'm going to gorge on other people's creative work. I'm going to gorge on experience. Even in your hometown, there will be places you haven't been or places that have changed over the past couple of years. There are parks that you can just go and sit in and listen to people. There will be restaurants that you can go double masked if you need to and just listen to how people talk. We've been kind of starved for that over the past couple of years. You can go to your local library and say to them, who writes books here? Who are the local authors? Who are the literary voices? Who are the artists? Who are the musicians from this area where I live right now? And gorge on that stuff. Or you can decide to take a virtual trip to the north of England, right? And read books by people who've been writing there through the centuries. You could decide to take a trip to the 16th century and read books and poetry that was published in the 1500s. You could take a trip to 1987 and just read as much as you can and listen to the music and look at the art that was coming out that year and take yourself on a virtual vacation. Don't work on your projects. Let yourself off the hook for your projects and just immerse yourself in other people's art. You can watch videos of other people getting excited about stuff. You can watch just artists in every field being awesome and inspiring at what they do. And that can be your vacation, even if you can't get on a plane. And I don't necessarily recommend that because travel is chaotic at the moment. So if you can take like a mental vacation, that is a fabulous thing, and give it a beginning and an end date so that even when you start to feel itchy to get back to your own writing, you can't do it until you reach the end date that you set for yourself. Then you can disembark, have a ritual where you, like I had to unpack my suitcase, maybe you can unpack all your notebooks again or something to give yourself a ritual at the end of that vacation and just see what that does for your creativity. So when I was at school, we used to come back after the summer and our teachers would always make us write an essay called What I Did on My Summer Holidays, and everybody groaned except for me because I loved writing. I'm kind of delivering that to you right here. What I did on my summer holidays was I reconnected with people I loved, I read, I listened to music, I looked at far vistas, and I just refreshed my brain from the everyday. But you don't need to get on a plane to do that. I'm going to encourage you to refresh your brain. If you want to read a craft book about writing, there's always new craft books about writing coming out. I'm personally interested in picking up Matt Bell's book. I know the StoryADay Superstars group, a lot of people in that group are working through a book at the moment called Writing Begins with Breath. And there's just tons of good stuff out there. I love the Save the Cat book. If you want to take a vacation and like learn something, we're coming into that time of year where everyone's thinking about back to school. Maybe you pick a book to work through and put your project writing aside. So don't work on your novel, but work your way through the book. If you've finished a novel and need to take a break and step away from it to let it marinate and find out, so you can see it with fresh eyes, maybe work through a craft book like that. I always recommend books by Donald Mass. I find his writing exercises very inspiring. In October, late September, early October, Writer Unboxed is doing their on conference. They've done an unconference before, which is their live in-person version of a writing conference and retreat all kind of rolled together. That's why it's called an unconference. This year it's virtual and they're calling it an on conference because it's online. I'll be one of the speakers there at the Writer Unboxed on conference, which is happening over 3 separate weekends so that you can absorb and not be completely overwhelmed. That will be great, so maybe put some time on your calendar for that. Lots going on, and as we roll from high summer into fall, we're approaching a change of season, and I always like to encourage people to think about what you're going to do in the next season. Because life doesn't just, we sit in our air-conditioned boxes if we're lucky enough to have air conditioning, and we don't necessarily notice the change in seasons, but I think our bodies do, I think our brains do, I think our being, we don't evolve that quickly that we can forget about the seasons, even if we're sitting indoors. So there's a change in mood, there's a change in energy coming. Perhaps you're taking it easy with your writing right now. Perhaps you are writing like a fiend right now because this is the time that you have for writing. But just be prepared for that change of season that's coming. I'm going to have a few things coming up at StoryADay that will hopefully help you make that transition and keep it going. But in the meantime, I just hope that you have a wonderful writing week. If you have any questions for me, please do send them along. There's a link in the notes, and I will do my best to answer those questions for you and address the issues that might be keeping you from writing or holding you back from making a step that takes you into the next level of your writing. We're never static. As long as we're writing, there's always a new challenge, and sometimes asking a question, just even asking the question, can help you figure out what it is that is bothering you, holding you back, or stalling you. So please do come over and ask me your questions. Even if you end up answering it yourself, it will be something that everybody else is secretly thinking and not actually saying. So please do consider leaving a question for me. And as I say, in the meantime, have a wonderful writing week.
Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at StoryADay.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week, and of course, keep writing.